Hello, everybody. It's Saturday night at 10 o'clock. Welcome to Starfleet Tactical. I, of course, am Chris Weave. As always, I have my co-host, Patrick Doyle here. Hello, Pat.
As always, except for the last 2 months.
Yes, that's true. Here in spirit, just like MacArthur in the Philippines, present in spirit. So, okay, so I don't know about the rest of you, but I just got done spending 2 weeks out in Las Vegas. And while I was out there for a very specific reason. And it was out there because I figured the right answer was to go to the place where the bookmakers are, where the odds makers are, and ask them, you odds making experts, what are the odds that Pat and I are speaking for our employers? And you know what they said, Pat?
$1 million to 1.
$1 million to 1 is probably high.
Yeah, that's probably a little high. I think it's
probably
absolutely high.
So we are not speaking for our employers, as always is the case. We are not speaking for our employers.
Exactly.
So what have you been doing the last couple of months other than shoveling snow?
Shoveling snow was mostly today. We got 22 inches of snow, so there was a little bit of shoveling going on, or snow plowing, or snow blowing, I guess. So did that.
You know how much snow Chris Carlson got?
He probably got 6 to 8 inches.
He got 7 inches of snow.
Yeah.
So they both live in the Minneapolis metropolitan area, but apparently there are good neighborhoods for snow and bad neighborhoods for snow.
Yeah. My suburb got the high score on this one.
Oh, lucky you.
So we won. We won the competition.
So, well, I'm glad you won the competition.
Yeah, I like to win.
Okay, I'm responding to something TJ said.
All right.
Actually, TJ, you're listening. I don't need to respond. Sure, that sounds good. Send me an email.
Yes, say words to him.
So I can say words to him verbally. So, what else has been going on with you since everybody else hasn't had a chance?
Just various combinations of. The airline business is getting busy, and so a lot of working overtime and working nights, or very early mornings. What else is there? Lots of Navy stuff. I was out of town. I was actually out of the country for a little while doing some stuff, and then otherwise, there's been an occasional Saturday where my wife's wanted to hang out with me on Saturday night, and so I like that. And so she works full time and everything now too. So sometimes now that she's got a full work schedule, Friday and Saturday nights are generally our only chance to go out and get dinner, have fun. So anyways.
Yeah. Now that you're not spending the other 163 hours of the week together.
But the other, still mostly Navy stuff, civilian job stuff, and other bits of traveling and holidays and that kind of thing. So yeah, it's just been a variety of things, but been very busy. So
okay,
but anyways, good to be back. Hello, everybody. By the way,
it's good to have you back. By the way, I just realized that with the way the camera is set up, you can't quite see the T-shirt. So let me adjust the camera a little bit. So somebody on my flight to Vegas was wearing a T-shirt that's same idea. It's a little bit different design, but it was the same, Pluto never forget. And I said, I need to get one of those. So that's I did.
Good. I like that.
I went and ordered it, and it was, it came to Des Moines and was waiting for me when I got back to Des Moines. So,
yeah. But, to answer somebody's question. Yeah. Right now there appears to be a pilot shortage. So everybody, actually probably a really good analogy, both for how the government works and probably any other big bureaucracy or something. But imagine you have 2 glasses of water. One is full and one is empty. And you go, oh my God, I've got an empty glass of water. And you dump it in there. And then you go, oh my God, I got an empty glass of water. Oh my God, I got an empty glass. And that seems to be how lots of bureaucracy bureaucracies work. And so right now the airlines have an empty glass of water, and they're trying to hire people, and various airlines are trying to steal pilots from other people and all this other stuff. So
can I modify that analogy a little bit?
Yeah, sure.
You've got two glasses of water. You got two glasses, one full of water, the other one empty of water. They want them half full. They go, oh, this one's too full, and they dump out half of it on the ground. And then they go, oh, wait a minute, this one's empty, and they stick it under the faucet and fill it up. Because I remember in the last job that I was talking with some of my colleagues who wore uniforms, and they were talking about how, like, at times they would say, like, we got too many majors, so we need to get rid of majors. But they would never, like, look at the number of lieutenant colonels they were going to need and how many lieutenant colonels they were going to lose. So they would go from, we've got too many majors, to we don't have enough lieutenant colonels 5 years later. Well, guess what? I wonder where lieutenant colonels come from.
If only they had dedicated professionals who are paid to think of these things.
Yeah. So it's like everything else in DoD. It's either a pump or a filter, and they oscillate back and forth between those two extremes. So, but oh well. Well, it's good that you're back. So last week, not last week, 2 weeks ago, I said, hey, send me ideas, put them in the comment section. I realized at some point just a little while ago that I didn't specify which comment section. I don't know if people put a bunch of stuff in, like, the Axanar comment section. I only looked at the Aries Studio one. So I'll go back when I go and do comments. We were talking about this before the show started. We need to be a little bit better about figuring out exactly where the show is going to be and only put it there. And we need to sit down and talk with Alec Peters about that and make sure that all of our marketing stuff is in sync, but we're not quite there yet. Because we've only been doing this for like a year and a half. But in any event, so I didn't actually do something based upon the comments. What I did was I said that the default was going to be the Building the Navy talk, which is a talk that I've been doing for a while. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my slides. And we'll go through this. And this is a talk that I don't know if Pat's ever seen me do before. I've done it at certain Bu9, certain conventions where David Weber and Tom Pope have been at. And so usually the way it works is I get up at the podium and I do part of it, and then David responds. But I can do it as a solo thing too. But Pat's going to join in. Before that, though, once again, my opinion is not my employer's. I'm behind in going through comment stuff. I try to go through comments, but I've been behind. My IT infrastructure things are mostly fixed, but I just haven't gotten caught up. And finally, there's some sad news I need to pass on to everybody. So I had to say goodbye to Buddy today. You all know Buddy. Buddy, my cat, frequently was a visitor, a guest. He was frequently a guest on the show. He would come in and be here for a while. And then he would go away. You haven't seen a whole lot of Buddy the last couple of months because Buddy was old. My sister had nursed him back to health for, I'll tell that story in just a moment, for a year. I had him, it would have been 10 years in January. So he was 11 years old, and they thought he was 8 years old when my sister got him. So that would make him 19, which is old for a cat. And there were the early signs of kidney failure. And back in the beginning of October, he had a TIA or a seizure or something that was very dramatic. And I was terribly afraid that we were going to lose him at the beginning of October. And he stuck around for another couple of months. He sort of rallied, and he was doing mostly well. He couldn't jump up on the bed like he used to, but he was still, very affectionate and would come and greet me at the door. And he had a potassium imbalance, but I was giving him potassium twice a day. And so he was doing better, but I was out in Vegas, and the first week I called back a couple of times. He was doing great. Buddy's doing wonderful. I get a phone call yesterday morning as I'm about to get to the main terminal at the airport from the vet saying, yeah, his kidneys have gone. He's not doing well. He said, I can keep him alive until you get here. But when I showed up today, the vet said that, basically he was giving him 500 milliliters of fluid each day. And that's the only reason he was still around, because his kidneys just weren't working. And so I elected not to bring him home because I didn't see any reason. I thought the best thing I could do was just sort of, spend some time with him there. So I was there for 45 minutes. And so Buddy isn't going to be on the show anymore. So a quick little story. My sister found him. He was living in the garden center of a Lowe's, outdoors. He had been shot with a BB gun in the neck, and it was terribly infected. And my sister had to nurse him back to health. So, the last 11 years he got was pretty good. I think he might have had a rough life before that, but I was really happy that I got to share those times with him. So yeah, he's gone. But let's move on. I specifically decided I wanted to do the show tonight because I hadn't done one last week. Pat, I knew was available, and I didn't want to dump it off on Pat because Pat hadn't really had a whole lot of time to prepare. And I decided that I kind of wanted to do the show, right? It was important to do the show tonight. So let's go ahead and talk about building a Navy. That's what we're going to talk about. Let's see. Okay. So basically there's only one slide that I'm going to talk about, and this is it. Because this is it. This is everything you need, at least from a science fiction standpoint, to sort of think about how do you build a Navy. And this slide, I think, originally came from OPNAV, which is the Chief of Naval Operations Office, from his staff. I got it when I was a professor at the Naval War College. Some naval officers came up to Newport, and we were talking about something, and they had this slide, and they showed the slide, and I said, hey, can I get a copy of that slide? And I didn't mention starships even once while asking for it. And so they gave me a copy of the slide, but I didn't write down who I got it from or, when, et cetera. It's just a slide that I had loose in my papers, but I think it came from OPNAV. But at some point I recreated the slide in PowerPoint as sort of something as a point of discussion with David Weber. I wanted to have the discussion with him about it. And so that's what I've got here. I've recreated the slide. And what I'm going to do is talk about the big categories and talk about the boxes underneath the big categories. And basically the way to read this is you start with all the big picture stuff on the left and you move to the right, and the decisions get sort of like more fundamental as you go down to the right. So at the strategic assumptions phase, you're talking about like, what's the world look like? And at the other phase, you're talking about like, how long do you make naval officers stay in the Navy until they retire and stuff, until they're eligible for retirement? And how many do you want in the reserves and how many do you want in the regular forces? And so that's what that sort of boils down to. So I'm going to go through all these slides. And as I say in the little, the notes at the bottom, oh, by the way, I still have that cough. It's acid reflux at this point. So I don't have COVID or anything like that. My temperature hasn't gone up. I have a complete sense of smell, but I am going to cough occasionally. So, as it says in the red part there, most of the time, the stuff in red is the only thing that you really see in science fiction. Sometimes you'll see the stuff in the dotted lines. You very rarely see anything that looks like a discussion of the rest of it. I should probably actually put dotted lines around security environment, because some of that is kind of implied in some science fiction discussions. For what it's worth, when I sat down and showed this to David Weber, and we went through box by box, he was able to give an answer for each and every one of those boxes. He's thought it through. He knew, he hadn't necessarily put this model together this way, but he knew he was able to extrapolate from the stuff that he had already thought about. So that's how that ended up working. Okay, so starting off with the strategic assumption side, there's really kind of two pieces of that. You've got the security environment that you're operating in. And Pat, of course, jump in anytime. As a cog in the machine that I am talking about, jump in anytime.
Yep. Cog is the correct phraseology there. Okay, moving on.
So the two pieces under strategic assumptions are basically what's the threat and what resources do I have to deal with the threat? In this case, money, right? If your security environment is that you're about to be overrun by the Soviet Union, but you got a $1.32 to your name, you're not going to fight them, right? That's kind of the situation there. So you need to have an assessment of exactly what your security environment looks like. What kind of world do you live in? And then you need to sort of have a fundamental understanding of what your resources look like. And, it says fiscal environment, but really there's other stuff in there too. Like if you're China and you've got 1.5 billion people, you can throw manpower at some problems. And that's one possible way that you can do it. And empirically, that's the way the Chinese have done stuff in the past. They've thrown manpower at it. They really don't do that in the same way anymore. Chinese army has gotten a lot smaller. But that's the sort of stuff that you can think about. Okay, so you have these strategic assumptions. The next step is to sort of decide, okay, now I need to think about what I'm going to do with this. And so remember, we're talking specifically about a Navy. And so I'm going to talk about Navy stuff from now on. So what, in this case, when we talk about strategic goals, it's what role does the fleet have? Is the fleet the first line of defense? Is the fleet something that harasses people? Is the fleet something that doesn't do any of the above, right? Do you even have a fleet? You need to decide how you're going to use your fleet, what the purpose of your fleet is for. That's a better way to say it rather than how, because there's some how questions later on. So what is the purpose of your fleet? What does it do in the larger picture? So if you go back and you think about Athens versus Sparta in the Peloponnesian War. This is an example that you always hear people talk about, the elephant and the whale, right? So how do you leverage the Athenians were a sea power. How do they leverage that to make things work? I'll note, Athens only lost when they lost control of the sea. As long as they were able to maintain their sea power, they were doing pretty good. When they lost their sea power, then they had a problem, even though the heart of decision is always on land, because people live on the land. They don't live in the sea, right? Even naval strategists understand that the heart of decision is on land. It's all about leveraging the sea to achieve the goals on land. Okay. Next, we have fleet missions. So you got the idea about what you want to try to do with your fleet. The next question is, what type of missions do you have your fleet do in order to achieve those objectives? So the service roles and mission is really about, the Navy doesn't operate in a vacuum, right? In the real world, we have an Air Force, we have an Army, we have a Marine Corps, we have other elements of national power potentially that could roll into this. So how do you sort of split up the mission pie between them, right? Who does what is basically what it boils down to. The US has some really kind of weird solutions there. The joke is that the Navy has an Air Force and an Army, and the Navy's Army has an Air Force also. That's not entirely accurate because they actually concentrate on different things, but it's close enough. How do you split up that pie? In the United States, we've got something called the Key West Agreement, which is from 1947, 1948, et cetera. It's about the time the Air Force was created. And it's basically how they split that pie up. And this is the reason why, for instance, according to the Key West Agreement, the Air Force doesn't do close air support with helicopters. Armed helicopters of that sort are the province of the Army. The Army went all in on armed helicopters because armed fixed-wing aircraft are the province of the Air Force, which leads to a really interesting question. If you said to the Army, you can have all the A-10s you want, would they still have Apaches? I don't know. I haven't had the chance to have that conversation with people that are specialists in those platforms to get a good feel for what the full trade-offs are.
I've always heard that Marines love A-10s. Anytime I've heard good things from a ground guy, it's usually a Marine talking about A-10s.
That doesn't surprise me. Now, the cynic in me, so I love the Marine Corps. I really do love the Marine Corps. But I will point out that the Marines love it when any other service is providing something to them, right? They're really big on like, we need you guys to bring back the battleships because we need that support. But if you said to them, how many air wings are you willing to give up to bring back the battleship, to pay for that? They're going, oh, no, we're not going to pay that bill. We want the Navy to pay that bill.
Yeah, but I think you just described human nature too.
Yeah, but the Marines always talk about being lean and mean, and we do more with less, etc. But part of it is they offload a bunch of their responsibilities to other services.
Yeah, chaplains, medics, all sorts of things. Yeah.
So I love the Marines, but every now and then you have to go, okay, got it. Yeah. But that having been said, I understand why they like it, because the A-10 guys really sort of view, we're all about the ground, we're not about the air.
Yeah.
I've heard it said that if the Marines need to call in close air support, you call the A-10s are an exception to this. You call the Marine Corps first, you call the Navy second, you call the Air Force third. Because in terms of their willingness to sort of get down close to the muck and actually like support guys on the ground.
Yeah.
Now that's an old saying. I don't know how current that is.
Well, I do remember there being a discussion, and I certainly don't claim to know the answer, of whether was it better to have an A-10, which goes relatively slow, but it's armored and can take damage, and it'll get its pilot back when it's damaged, because it'll take hits. So it is going to take some damage, potentially, I guess, in a pure competition sort of way. Or is it better to have, an F-16 that comes zorching in at super high speed, drop its bomb, probably is in and out before anyone can do anything. But of course, if you hit it low to the ground while it's going at high speeds, and it's a little bit more fragile than an A-10. So, it's always, I think it's that constant debate between, do you want to have something easier to hit but armored, or do you want to have something fast and harder to hit but perhaps more fragile? Actually, as far as I know, the same discussion happens amongst infantry. Is it better to wear body armor, or is it better to be light and maneuverable? Because an extra 60 pounds of gear gets really hard, or 80 or whatever, gets really hard to run, gets exhausting quick. So
I know from the experience of a couple of people, friends of mine, who went and worked with the Marines, you show up with your body armor that you're required to have, and the first thing they do is they pull you aside and they say, you don't need this, take that plate out, you don't need this, and they start pulling plates out.
Mm-hmm.
Because that body armor is really, really heavy.
Yeah.
I've never worn it, but I know that my friend Steven, when he went to deploy, he got it several months early so he could practice wearing it. And that included driving home, putting the body armor on, walking up to his like 5th floor apartment, specifically going up the stairs wearing the body armor.
Mm-hmm.
And in the morning, he'd put it back on and he'd walk down to his car. And it would stay in the car all day. It's not like he was walking around the War College with it.
Yeah.
But he made a point of like going and doing physically doing physical exertion, wearing the body armor just so that he could get used to it.
Well, and then
first thing the Marines did is they pulled out about half the plates.
Yeah. And, and then just moving around with boots on irregular ground, having to carry around, ammunition. It's made of lead and it's heavy. Yeah. And that cool rifle that always seems so light in the movies gets pretty heavy after hours or days of carrying it around. So, but on uneven terrain, you get tired just walking around, let alone running and, carrying around 80 pounds or 100 pounds of stuff. So,
yeah. Or as Eddie Izzard would put it, running, jumping, climbing trees.
Yes.
So let's see. I think I was on Fleet ConOps, right? So Fleet ConOps is, in general, what do you envision your fleet is doing? Right? What's concept of operations is what ConOps stands for. So what do you envision it doing? Right? Is it doing blockading? Is it doing convoy escort? Is it doing sea control? Right? Is it doing anti-submarine warfare? All that sort of stuff. Like, you got to sort of figure out exactly what you want, what you think your fleet's going to do. And remember, all of these start off on the left and they move to the right. So you're making decisions at each level that you then have to go through and sort of decide, they impact the decisions at the next level. Now, you shouldn't think of this as being one pass and done, because it's not. It's an iterative process, right? You may get to the end and say, I don't like that answer, or that answer doesn't quite work for me. It doesn't cut the mustard. So I need to go back and sort of revisit some of the earlier stuff. And, there's feedback loops here. So don't think of this as a one and done. But this is interesting stuff. I'd like to see what Starfleet's version of this looks like. I'd like to see how Starfleet answers these questions. So after Fleet ConOps, you have Fleet Posture. So ConOps is what it's doing. Posture is, where is it? Right? In the interwar period, our fleet posture was that we were a garrison force. And what that means is the United States Navy, was based in the continental US, CONUS, right? So the Navy's based in the US on the East Coast and the West Coast. I think it was for part of that, it changed over time. We're talking a couple of 100 years there, but you had like the scouting force on the Atlantic side and the battle force on the Pacific side, if I remember, for a while there. And, but most of the fleet was in garrison. Now, that doesn't mean that they were in port. The US Navy was actually very active in the 20s and 30s. Even though it was a garrison force, it was going out. They were going to sea all the time, but they didn't do a forward deployment. They didn't just like go and hang out in the Persian Gulf. And when they came home was San Diego or Norfolk or someplace like that. Nowadays, we're a forward deployed force. We have some units that are based in foreign countries. We have units based in Australia and a much greater number of units based in Japan. And we will go and hang out in places and just deploy to like the Mediterranean or the Persian Gulf or the Indian Ocean or wherever, and just conduct patrol operations there and just sort of hang out and be available. That's not the way we used to do it. And so that's what we mean by fleet posture. So now that you've got an idea, you've talked about what your assumptions are. You've tried to figure out what role your fleet has in the larger national policy, and then you've sort of talked about what the missions are and what where it's going to be in ConOps and stuff like that. The next thing you need to do is you need to design your fleet to meet those requirements, right? So the first part of that is fleet capabilities, and that's what specific types of tasks is your fleet going to be capable of doing? So an example of that might be air defense against long-range missile attack. Right? I want the fleet to be able to do that. I want the fleet to be able to do area defense with long-range missiles, as opposed to point defense with short-range missiles. Right? Point defense is about protecting the platform that's firing the missile. Area defense is about one ship protecting another ship. So you have ships that are protecting aircraft carriers. They do. You have Aegis cruisers that are protecting the aircraft carriers. They're doing area defense. So you figure out what sort of capabilities you want. Then you think about how much capacity do you want. So the first part there was talking about capability. Now we're talking about capacity. Capability is what you can do. Capacity is how much of it you can do. Right? A 50 caliber machine gun, if it has one bullet, has good capability, but limited capacity. So how much do you want? How much capacity do you want? And then you start talking about what type of ships do you want to get to that capacity? That's the fleet mix. So do you build a few big ships? Do you build a lot of small ships? How do you mix them up, right? How much of that are you going to put in aircraft carriers? How much of that are you going to put in other things? So for a while there, that while being like the 1950s, for a while there, all the offensive capability of a carrier strike group, or what was called a carrier battle group at the time, was in the aircraft carrier. And then you got to the point where they started adding capabilities onto the escorts. And so now, even if there isn't an aircraft carrier there, the escorts have a significant amount of capability themselves. And the aircraft carrier helps with the defense role. Now, the aircraft carrier always helped with the defense role. But exactly how you're binning that has changed as things like Tomahawk have come online, and long range strike has become a thing from the escort ships. And so the next question is, where are you going to put those parts of the fleet? Where are you going to lay it down? And so how many bases are you going to have? Where are you going to put those bases? How many ships are going to be at the bases? Do you do something like the Brits did with the Grand Fleet, where all the battle cruisers are at one base and the rest of the fleet is someplace else? The Brits also, they based everything at Scapa Flow because they wanted to be able to intercept the Germans, and putting everything to the north made more sense than basing it down at Portsmouth in the south. So they had all these bases in the south, and they said, we need to base this up in the upper Scotland, northern Scotland, and I think the Orkneys, if I remember correctly, that's the name of those islands up there, so that they can run off and be able to intercept the Germans. So that's the next thing you need to do. You design your fleet, and that includes designing all the bases that go along with it. Okay. So now that you've done those things, it's time to think about manning strategy. How many guys do you need to man this fleet that you just built? And where do you get them? And so note that this also really sort of factors back into the fleet capabilities side of things too, because you have to be able to design your ships. You design your ships for a certain manning strategy, right? I said that this has feedback loops. But you have, so you design it, you might have more automation, less automation. The Russians famously automate their submarines to a degree that we're just unwilling to do. They'll have a submarine with a crew of 30 people where we would have a crew of 100, because they've added a whole bunch of automation there, and they just do it as an automated thing, and they accept the fact that they're just not going to have the crew to do it, but they don't need as much crew to make that work. And that's great if you're willing to do that. You see this actually in the Honor Harrington series, where they have to change their manning strategy over time. They have to increase their level of automation, and that causes certain problems, but it solves the problem that they just don't have enough guys to go around. Manning strategy isn't totally dependent on the ship, though. It's also dependent upon how many things you want to be able to do at any given time. So the US Navy will periodically sell off ships to other countries. For instance, we sold Oliver Hazard Perry class frigates to the Australians. The Australians crew them in approximately half the number of people that we crew them at. So that must mean the Australians are smarter and better than we are. Is that right? Well, actually, Pat, did you have a comment there?
No, it just means they have a reduced capacity, most likely.
Yes.
Or they take off some of the equipment on the ship. But because for every piece of equipment, every capability probably requires a person to do it. And if you think about
another person to maintain it.
If you think about, then actually you need probably, for every person you need on the ship, you probably need 3 or 4 people, plus people in the pipeline and training to take over for them, and people to man, the schools and all that kind of stuff to teach people to do it. So just adding one person, and then your expenses, you probably have a few people in retirement for all the equipment you had on your ship 20 years ago. You have a bunch of people in retirement now. So everything has a big expense there. And then the other thing, and this is a similar, on a similar vein, like Wayne Hughes talks about it in Fleet Tactics. It's like, yeah, it's great to have the best ship with hundreds and hundreds of missiles, but is it going to sink with 50 missiles on board? That's not so useful. The Oliver Hazard Perry had, I believe, some 50-pound brains did some thinking and determined that, yeah, about 20 missiles is about how many they'll get to shoot before they die in full-fledged combat. So it's a waste to put any more ammunition on the ship. You have to make decisions like that too. Every 5-inch gun you put on that one ship is a 5-inch gun. Like, hey, we should arm all our freighters or all our supply ships. Well, that's one less gun you have available to put on a warship somewhere. So everything costs you something.
And you add up enough of those guns and it's like, okay, in order to pay for the guns in the other 4, we have to cancel the 5th one.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of different ways that you can muck with crew size. One is that you give up the idea of being able to do 24-hour ops. So you just don't have enough guys to do it 24 hours a day. You've got like one watch section that has a certain capability. Like if you want to do ASW, you got one set of guys that can do ASW, and you just live with the fact you can't do it 24 hours a day. The other way is let's see, there was something else I was going to say about that one. Oh, and that includes things like collateral duties, right? It's a number of things that you can do at the same time. So like as a general rule, the way we do it is the guys that man the flight deck on a destroyer have other jobs, but that's their if they have to do helo ops, they have to go do that, and somebody else backfills them wherever their other job is. Well, if you don't have the people to backfill them, you just may not be able to do helo ops and ASW at the same time. I'm just picking ones at random, right? So you accept a limitation on both your capabilities and your capacities if you change your manning strategy and quote unquote underman everything. Now, we tried with the literal combat ship to basically, our thought was you have everybody cross-rated so everybody can do 3 different things. Well, there's a couple of problems with that. One is it's really, first of all, you have to have just extraordinarily good people to do that, right? If it's bad enough when you want somebody to be an expert in one thing, but now you want them to be an expert in 3 things. The second thing is there's an awful lot of schooling required with that. And so instead of having like 3 people each go to a 2-week school, you now have got one guy going to a 6-week school. So you lose that guy for a longer period of time. Those guys end up being really overworked. And they can't do, okay, they've been trained to do 3 things and they can do 3 things, but they can't do all 3 things at the same time.
Well, the other thing is if you practice only one skill, you'll probably get good at that skill. If you have to practice 3 different skills for your living, you're going to be maybe you're going to be mediocre at all 3 things. So,
Yeah.
And actually, I think I've said this to you a few times, Chris, but thing I learned from Starfleet battles is that everything is energy allocation. How are you going to allocate the energy? Or I'm sorry, how are you going to allocate your hours in the day? If you're going to allocate them in one place, that means you're not doing something else.
And we'll talk about it when we get to force management also, but you run into the problem of if you treat your crew, if you write them hard and put them away wet in a system where everybody's a volunteer, guess what happens?
They leave.
They leave. There's a story about in the 1980s when Lebanon happened. So the Iowa, USS Iowa, left port for a 2-week at-sea period and was gone for 18 months because Lebanon blew up. So they said, go to Lebanon. We need you. We need you in the Mediterranean. They sent them to the Med, kept them there for some number of months. And then they said, well, you were due to do your deployment now anyway, so we're just going to roll you into your deployment. And so they rolled them into their deployment, and they were gone for 18 months altogether. Oh, and while this happened, the ship was doing a home port change from the East Coast to the West Coast. So all the families got to, without the spouse there, got to like sell the house in Norfolk and buy a house in San Diego. And from what I understand, the crew retention on that ship was like in the toilet. And there were congressional hearings and all this other stuff. It was a big hubbub.
Yeah. And for those of you who desert your spouse while you have to do a move while you're busy playing sailor or whatever, actually, it doesn't matter what you're doing or how important it is. That does not make you popular with on the home front.
Now, Wright asked if I meant New Jersey. I had heard that it was the Iowa, but now that I think about it, I don't think I ever went and double checked that myself. So that maybe it was New Jersey. I thought it was Iowa, though. Could be wrong. I now have a research topic. Thank you very much, Wright. Okay, so let's see. That was manning strategy, organic support functions. Okay, so what does the fleet do for itself? And what do they contract out to other people? Like, for instance, part of the Goldwater-Nichols Act limits the organic support functions that each of the services can perform for themselves. This is why the Navy doesn't fly big-wing tankers. The Air Force owns big-wing tankers. That's their mission. So the Navy doesn't do that for itself. If it needs that sort of tanker support, it calls the Air Force in to do with that. So what sort of stuff do you do for yourself? Like if you're the Marines, you draw upon the U.S. Navy for medical, chaplain. You draw upon the U.S. Army and the Navy and the Air Force, for that matter, for training manuals and stuff like that. Like for the small arms, they use the Army manuals. They don't reinvent any wheels. So the official Marine Corps manual for the M4 is the Army manual for the M4, because why rewrite that? And so, that's not a function they perform organically themselves. They draw upon other forces. And then you've got the question of shore infrastructure. What part is ashore and what part do you take to sea with you? And what sort of stuff do you do ashore? That includes things like shipyards, but it also includes things that also includes things that like your meteorology capability. Do you put a meteorologist in the battle group and have him do his own weather guessing? Or do you have a command ashore that says, here's what your weather is going to be? Do you do your own network support, or do you do that ashore? One of the things I talk about in some of the other talks, I think some of the other talks I've done is how much people don't fully appreciate how much shore support a carrier battle group, carrier strike group gets. Now, it's obvious that they get the logistic support, right? Ships come out and give them stuff. But I mean, just in terms of like calling back and saying, we need this piece of information, like all the intel stuff comes from ashore. They do surveillance and reconnaissance organically. I don't mean to imply that they don't actually gather data themselves, but a lot of it they're getting from people ashore whose job it is to support a given battle group or ships in a particular area. So there's a lot of shore infrastructure stuff. The final major category is
Actually, on shore infrastructure and kind of support and some of that kind of thing. One of the other things, I know I read a book. It was about the Air Force specifically, but I've seen this discussion and these changes in the Navy. I've worked on a couple big staffs, and there's always this argument, or not argument, but the pendulum swings between distributed, like if you're going to have your supplies and spare parts, we're going to have, boss, I got a great new idea. We're going to have all the spare parts in one place so we can keep track of it. We'll save a whole bunch of money. It'll all be warehoused, cared for. We'll have specialists dealing with it. And then when a ship needs something, we'll send it out to them. And they'll show you pie graphs and PowerPoint slides about how it's going to save a ton of money. It'll be great and be the best thing ever. And all they have to do is do it for 5 or 6 years, and they'll have saved money over what they're currently doing. Then about 3 years later, which is about the tour length of somebody, someone comes up, it's like, why are we doing it this way? This is stupid. You know, back in my old place where we did everything right, we had it distributed, and so that everybody got to manage their own supplies and all that kind of stuff. And we shut down the warehouse, and here's all the pie graphs that show how much money we're going to save. We just need to do it for 5 or 6 years, and we'll save money over the current way we're doing it. And so far in my experience, they changed the way they're doing it faster, well before they gain any of the savings that were the impetus behind the whole thing. So, and so that centralized versus dispersed argument or principle, you can apply that to almost anything you want. But that's another thing that, you know, having worked on staffs, like I said, it's always good to have some guy who's been there for 15 or 20 years, because he can say, no, you dummy, we did that 5 years ago. It didn't work then. It won't work now. But often they don't listen to that guy because he's not wearing a uniform. But anyways, I digress. Go ahead.
And I also believe that anybody who cites Walmart as a reason why a military should do something, that idea should be immediately disqualified just by virtue of the fact that they're citing Walmart. Well, you know, to the best of my knowledge, Target has never tried to interdict Walmart.
Target ambush squads. Yeah. And that's the other point, because some people will come up with a good new business idea and offer all these efficiencies and stuff like that. But efficiency sometimes means less redundancy and less your more fragile organization. The military needs to be effective. Efficiency is nice, but and a lot of people will go, oh, in the real world, we're not this wasteful and all that kind of stuff. But the military needs the capacity to absorb a hit and use up its stuff and that sort of thing, and still have something left over. So the military has to be effective more than it needs to be efficient. But that's expensive. So anyway.
Yeah. And, you know, whenever anybody starts talking about getting rid of redundancies, I had this happen in the last job. It's like, oh, we got these redundancies. There's different agencies that are doing the same thing. We should get rid of the redundancies. To which my response is, do you have a spare tire in your car? You've got a 25% redundancy right there. Why don't you get rid of your spare tire?
Yeah. Yeah. And if you think about it, that extra weight means you're spending more in gas.
Yep.
You're spending more in gas everywhere you go. Every pound of the urban legend in the airlines is one little sugar packet carried on an airplane over the course of a year costs $1 in gas. Well, they carry a lot of sugar packets and pillows and blankets and pamphlets and magazines and you name it. all that stuff actually costs gas, as well as, and then the logistical support to get the gas there and all that stuff. Anyways, everything has a cost.
And whenever I fly United, I always add a sugar package to my luggage. It's me sticking it to the man.
You go, girl.
So, okay, so let's see. Where was I? Force management, right? Personnel policies. Okay, so back when I was telling the story that Wright's pretty much convinced me that I had the story wrong, that it was really New Jersey, USS New Jersey. But that includes, personnel policies as things like personnel tempo, purse tempo, turnover, crew rotation, how long do people do stuff? For instance, also like how many people do you expect to turn over? How long do you expect your guys to serve? For instance, the Army is sort of based upon the idea that a significant percentage of the people who join the Army are going to be there for a while, that they stick around, right? They want people to go career. The Marine Corps, on the other hand, their model is kind of churn, right? Their marketing to try to get recruits is based upon that, right? It's are you good enough to be a Marine? Well, it's like, well, yeah, I did it for 2 years. I guess that's a yes, and then they leave. And so the Marine Corps model would break if all the Marines said, yeah, I'm going to stick around and make it a career. The Army model would break if all the soldiers said, no, I'm just going to do my one tour and then I'm done. And, they have dramatically different personnel policies. Logistics concept. How do you actually provision the force? And we talked about a bunch of this. Do you have depots? Do you do just-in-time delivery? Do you stockpile everything on? That's always the big question. Every time anybody talks about just-in-time is when I start talking about Target taking shots at Walmart.
Well, we're all getting a good lesson on just-in-time delivery systems and how well that seems to work when anything bad happens. And in war, a lot of bad things happen. So
not only do a lot of bad things happen, there are people that are actively trying to make bad things happen.
That's right. Bad guys get a vote.
The bad guys get a vote, and we're trying to make bad things happen to them. And if nothing else, just in time is really kind of based upon the idea that everything is predictable, right? We're just going to sort of turn the crank. We're going to go, we got an idea of what the Christmas season looks like versus the middle of summer. And as a result, we sort of got a ballpark to judge demand for the Christmas season. And we might turn it up or down based upon other economic factors. But it's, who planned on September 10th? Who was thinking about invading Afghanistan, right? Who was thinking about that? Nobody. Absolutely nobody was thinking about invading Afghanistan on September 10th.
Yeah, nobody was thinking about a land war in Asia.
Nobody was thinking about a land war in Asia. And so then we go and we do it. And so how do you plan just-in-time delivery for something where all of a sudden your demand signal is going to go up by 300% overnight or more, right? So you got to be careful when you're thinking about these things. The next one is level of afloat readiness. So how close are you to being ready to fight at any given time? And level of ashore readiness is the same thing. How close is your shore establishment to being ready to fight? Do you have a cadre of people, and your assumption is that they're going to form the nucleus of your force, and you're going to spin people up? You have a bunch of ships in reserve that you're gonna have to spin up, but they're undercrewed. Like the Brits, I think in the interwar period, were crewing ships at something like a 25% level, which wasn't enough to really go to war. It was barely enough to keep them maintained. And so what are you going to, is that your policy, or is your policy that you're ready to start fighting from a standing start at any given time? You need to sort of think that stuff through. And that's what that means by afloat and shore readiness. And finally, how do you buy all the stuff you need? What's your acquisition strategy? And that includes things like, do you buy a lot? Do you buy a little bit? Do you buy cheap? Do you buy expensive? Do you buy, that has impacts into what your fleet mix looks like? Because it might be that you turn the crank a lot.
Do you make sure that all your medications come from China?
Yeah. So yeah, that's a really good one. I mean, we have a tendency that we get a design we like and we just keep turning the crank and we iterate, right? A late model Flight 3 Los Angeles class submarine looked nothing like USS Los Angeles, although, they upgrade things over time too. We've been cranking out Arleigh Burke class destroyers since the late 80s, early 90s. I forget exactly when the Burke entered the fleet. But we've been turning the crank for a long time on those. We built a lot of ballistic missile submarines that way. We have this tendency that, we get something we like and we just sort of turn the crank. And one of the reasons why we do that is it makes it cheaper when you do that. Whereas the Russians are constantly building, 2 of this and 3 of that and 1 of this, et cetera, et cetera. And, their acquisition strategies to spread out the work amongst a bunch of different design bureaus. So that's, you need to sort of figure out exactly how you're going to do that, what your acquisition strategy is. And like I've been saying all along, you can get to the end of it and not like the answer. And at every step along the way, you have to have feedback loops to sort of go, okay, you know what? You made this decision earlier in the process, but when it gets to the point of being able, we have to implement that through other things further down. We can't make that work. So you need to go back and rethink it. Right. And, things change over time. Political climates change over time. We find ourselves in a situation where we're suddenly invading Afghanistan and we didn't budget for a war. I mean, I spent a decade working in the computer industry, in the software business, primarily, because because when Desert Storm happened, we hadn't budgeted for a war. And at the time I was looking for an intro-level DoD job. There were no intro-level DoD jobs to be had because they all went away for about a year, 2 years. And by the time the dust settled, I was a computer geek. And I did that for the 90s and only transitioned back to DoD when I backed into a job at the Center for Naval Analysis in mid-1999. And I've been a defense geek ever since. But I spent the 90s as a computer geek. So, but that's pretty much what I've got. Pat, any final thoughts?
No, I think I think that that covered some of the overview stuff. I mean, it's complicated and it's not easy. A lot of anybody who says, "Oh, you know what we need to do? This one thing, everything will be perfect." Then, yeah, they haven't thought through the problem. So.
Yeah, in fact, one of the things, all right, I'm looking for my mouse. Where'd my mouse go?
Everything has unintended consequences, second order, but you pull levers. Like if you want your readiness to be super high, you've increased your readiness. That's great. Readiness is way up here, but now you're out to sea so much, your retention probably may go down.
Yes.
So every time you pull a lever and make a change, you affect all those other things in there. And so you never just get to say, well, we're going to put this lever up to maximum and everything will be perfect now. We got everything the way we want it. Nope, because somewhere along the way it has an impact in other areas.
Yeah, and one of the things I didn't specifically mention here, but I should, is that one of those manning decisions is how much of your surge capacity is in active duty military and how much of it is in the reserves.
Mm-hmm.
And there's different ways that different parts of the military do it different ways. So like, for instance, as near as I can tell, when it comes to like medical people, when you activate a doctor in the reserves, you don't send him overseas. What you do is you send the active duty person overseas and you send the reservist to go function at a naval hospital someplace to backfill on the guy that you sent overseas. When it comes to reservists and other capabilities, other types of billets, they'll have a tendency to send them overseas to do stuff, and you end up with weird situations like the Navy. The Navy provided a lot of office workers for Afghanistan and Iraq, because that's how the Navy could contribute, was to provide people to work in offices, so that the trigger pullers could actually go out and be pulling triggers. One of the things, incidentally, when I do this talk with David Weber, I've gotten to the point where I say, here's how it's going to work out. We're going to start out doing this, and we're going to spend about the first 45 minutes getting through first 35 to 40 minutes getting through the first half of the slide. And then I'm going to tell David to shut up, and I'm just going to burn through the rest real quick. And that's some variation of that is usually how it ends up happening, because David will go off and he'll talk about stuff. And, I talked enough about this. David would have a tendency, he'd be giving specifics from the Honorverse and et cetera, et cetera. And I don't think we ever actually did it methodically all the way through like we've done it tonight. I don't think we've ever been able to really do that. I usually would just sort of end up saying, I'm going to skip over some stuff really fast. So, but that's about all I've got for tonight. So
the one person pointed out, like, okay, let's go through and talk through this chart and see how that applies to Starfleet.
Yes. And, I thought about trying to do a Starfleet specific version of this. I debated whether I would try to do that. And the first thing that happened was, plan A was, I was supposed to be in Des Moines today. And I was supposed to be doing this from my brother's house. And if that had happened, I would have had a little bit of time to do some specific thinking about Star Trek. But I think part of the problem is we can fill in some of these boxes, right? We can fill in the security environment box because we know about the Borg and we know about the Dominion and we know about some of that stuff. But like the fiscal box, I don't have any idea where to start on that. I don't recall there being anything that even looked like, does the Federation have budget discussions? They don't have money. How can they have budget discussions?
Well, but you're going to have resources.
Really. It's a resource allocation thing, but I don't think we've got any insight as to how that looks.
Right.
So Canon sources for most of this are somewhat limited.
No, but I think we could power through that discussion. There'd be some things we're not sure about this, but let's speculate. We could speculate our way through it.
Okay. Do we want to do that for next time?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Okay. That actually sounds like a good plan.
I have a couple ideas on a couple things there too. So yeah, I think we could definitely do that.
Okay. If we
thank you, right?
Thank you, right? If we thought this through a little bit more, maybe the right answer would have been to do all that in advance, and then we'd do half the chart this today and half the chart the next day.
Sure, but we've given a primer. We've talked through a primer of it, and we can go into some more details and jot down some ideas over the course of the week. And the other thing is how many people is the U.S. Navy? Something like 300,000.
Something like that.
350,000. And that's to support about 250 to 300 ships of varying sizes. And where on each of those ships, for most of them, your crew is 250 to 400 people, maybe. Obviously, there's going to be some smaller boats, and then you've got the aircraft carriers, which are 5,000 people.
And you've got shore aviation establishments. Aside from just shore commands, you've got things like P8s.
Right, right. So you'd have those things. But, that's a lot of people. That's a lot of people to support those, support that number of vessels. But anyways, if you think about Starfleet, I've heard some things, or some people speculate that they probably by the Dominion War have 7,000 or 8,000 ships or something like that. Just think about the infrastructure it takes to maintain that and crew that, and of course you've got billions of billions and billions of people to help crew that, a larger population to draw from. But so anyways, it'd be interesting to go through some of that.
Yeah, and you get a few little implications in Sternbach and Okuda about like ships going into the shipyard for refits and stuff like that, right? They talk about it a little bit, but I wonder what it sort of looks. I mean, what's the Star Trek equivalent of going into dry dock to scrape barnacles off the hull?
Well, actually, there was an episode in The Next Generation where they have to get I can't remember the beam they shoot at the ship
that went through the
everybody had to get off the ship because it would kill everybody, turn them to liquid or whatever. So they at least made up some equivalent. Traveling in subspace causes subspace barnacles, so, or like I said, some equivalent.
Right. Okay, so it sounds like we got a topic for the next time.
All right.
And so I don't think I have any.
Virion scan. Yep. I didn't want to mispronounce it because I wasn't entirely sure. All right.
Yeah, I like the question, does Starfleet use a standard 5-paragraph op-ord format? Yeah, I haven't seen anything that looks like an op-ord.
Well, I believe Lissa had wanted to get to bed somewhat early.
True. We should let Lissa go sleep. So thank you. Special thanks.
Nice. I love you guys.
She almost she came on and then one of us started talking again and she disappeared almost as quickly.
That was totally by accident. I meant to click a different button.
But your timing was perfect.
I was trying to click something else and I didn't realize where my mouse was.
Special thanks to Melissa for tonight's to Lissa for tonight's show. I'm kind of zonked too. My day started very early this morning. I was on the road at like 5:30.
I have now woken up thanks to the power of sugar.
Yeah, and so Lissa said something early on about how she was potentially interested in, did we need her tonight for this? And I said, well, it's probably going to be pretty simple, but FYI, I had to say goodbye to Buddy today. And her immediate response was, I will be there. I will be there. So
I've been through that. Not gonna make you do this stream without me if you're going through that.
Yeah, and I don't know if everybody noticed, but at one point I sort of looked over like this, and it's because I thought I saw something out of the corner of my eye, and no, I didn't.
I'm sorry, Chris.
Is what it is. So I did talk with the vet about potentially getting another cat. I'll get at least one more cat at some point. It's just, I'm thinking, I'm currently in an apartment. I mean, I've talked to you all about how I'm in an apartment that I purposefully picked an apartment that was too small because I wanted to wake up every morning and go, damn it, I still live here. I need to go buy a house. And I haven't yet done the buying of a house. The apartment worked well for Buddy because Buddy was an older cat. When I was still in Charlottesville, I used to have a cat tree that went up on top of the entertainment unit, so he could climb up and he could be up on top there. Well, I don't have room for that in the new place, but in Charlottesville, he had stopped using it. He had sort of, his bones had gotten a little creaky, his joints had gotten a little creaky, and he stopped being so vertically oriented. So this apartment was perfectly fine for an older cat that didn't want to jump up on stuff, et cetera, et cetera. Not nearly so good for young cats. So
yeah, there's a reason why I now have one of the cat window beds in my window in my bedroom, because when family was here during Thanksgiving, my cats decided they needed to get away from the kids, understandably so. I was getting sensory overload from the kids, let alone the cats. And at some point, they pulled down my curtain.
Yep.
From the wall. You
got to provide for the cats. And like the place I'm in now, I never get sun in through my living room, my balcony door. The sun just doesn't. It's on the wrong side of the building.
Yeah.
So,
see, my bedroom gets sunlight like 3/4 of the day because the corner of the house I'm on is like just that right spot.
Yeah, and I get there's some sun that comes in on the other side, but there just wasn't a place where I could create a little patch of sun for Buddy to hang out in. So Buddy, you know, he got heating pads instead. He didn't get sunlight, but he got heating pads. So
that's fair.
So, all right, I think it's time to call it.
All right. Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Good night, everyone. Thanks for being
Hopefully
here.
see you
We
soon.
will see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.